And today, Jennifer and I and others had a chance to go see the Western Wall of the Temple Mount, the Western Wall tunnels, so much of the old city. And as you stand there, you can't help but behold the miracle before you. And it got me thinking about another miracle that I hope all of you don't see too far away. Because 1917 was a miracle, 1948 was a miracle, 1967 was a miracle, 2017, the declaration of Jerusalem as the capital was a miracle, and there's no reason why the miracle of the reestablishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible. I don't know how it would happen, you don't know how it would happen, but I know that it could happen. That's all I know. I would submit to you, in light of the support you have in Washington, D.C., the support you have amongst patriotic Americans, amongst evangelical Christians, amongst believers, amongst Republicans, even amongst some Democrats who can barely say it anymore in Washington. Buy the ticket, take your action, do what needs to be done here in Israel, because I truly believe this is a moment where America will have your back.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
I see skies of blue, clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night, and I think to myself,
We're human beings. We're not symptoms of overpopulation for you to deal with.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
A new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. The rapid growing exploitation of the world's supply of energy and water is a matter of deep concern, and the toxic byproducts of widespread industrialization have increased atmospheric pollution to dangerous levels. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations. Economic growth is, of course, an inevitable corollary of a growing population and is essential to improve standards of living. But without careful coordination, unrestrained economic growth poses further threats to our environment. This was a major subject of discussion at the conference in Rio de Janeiro on the environment 2 years ago. The focus then was on sustainable growth and global development. It was pointed out at the conference that growth is most efficiently managed by the private sector, but regulation of the process by national governments and international bodies is also needed. And once again, the United Nations should certainly be among the catalysts and coordinators of this process.
First time in history, foreign policy has become global. Communications are instantaneous, and there exist problems which are genuinely not national, like environment, nuclear proliferation, and similar issues. So in this sense, we are living in a new world, and a new world order will emerge. The only question is whether it will arise out of intellectual and moral insight and by design, or whether it will be forced on mankind by a series of catastrophes. That's the challenge of our period. And it makes it, to my mind, one of the most exciting periods in which anybody can live.
This is an extraordinary story. So he was born in a place called the Judengasse, which was a Jewish ghetto, basically. And it was the house that he lived in when he eventually had 13 children was only 14 feet wide. And he lived there with his very, very overpowering and dominant and an incredibly brilliant wife who was called Guttel. He was determined to get out of this ghetto. At night time, the ghetto was closed, you weren't allowed to leave. The street was so narrow that no sunlight could penetrate. There was no plumbing, there was no sewage, there was nothing. So everything you can imagine happened in this street. And unsurprisingly, he wanted to get out of there. And he started a small coin business, and that did reasonably well. But actually, and this is where it ties into legacy, his great strength was to send his 5 sons to the capitals of Europe at that time. And what they did is they set up, in effect, the first international banking system. So whereas everyone used to be in separate different countries or separate cities until then, these 5 boys communicated with each other, sometimes by pigeon, and they wrote to each other in Judendeutsche, which was a kind of Yiddish German vernacular. And that is why they were so successful. And this absolute belief in togetherness, you've got to stand together, you've got to work together, you've got to work across borders, you've got to work with rules. And by 1789, when the last one went, to 1815, so a very, very short period of time, it was said that no government or king would consider going to war without the Rothschilds supporting them, because that was how incredibly influential and powerful they had become.
And finally, it takes resilience. As technology evolves, we need to build up societal immunity around information manipulation. Because research has shown that pre-bunking is much more successful than debunking. Pre-bunking is basically the opposite of debunking. In short, prevention is preferable to cure. Perhaps if you think of information manipulation as a virus, instead of treating an infection once it has taken hold, that is debunking. It is much better to vaccinate so that the body is inoculated. Pre-bunking is the same approach. Because disinformation relies on people passing it on to others. It is essential that people know what malign information's influence is and what the techniques are that are behind it. And as the knowledge goes up, our chances of being influenced goes down.
Either according to the Bible or according to biology. Divinity is not far enough to describe what we are trying to do. Now we are much better than the God of the Bible. I mean, in the Bible you have these recurring droughts that the people of Israel do something wrong, God's become angry, drought, no water. But now Israel has built in recent years a huge desalinization factory on the shores of the Mediterranean. And most drinking water in Israel today actually come from these plants, from these factories. So we can make God as angry as we like. I mean, he can stop the rains, we don't care. We still have water because science has managed to go way beyond the expectations of the ancient Hebrews.
You have a lovely passage where you say, looking at the world today, God seems to be making a comeback, but this is a mirage. God is dead. It just takes a while to get rid of the body.
I think the most interesting place today from a religious perspective is Silicon Valley. My bet is this is where the new religions of the 21st century are being created, will be created. And these will be kind of techno-religions, religions based on technology.
The housing crisis, cancer, poverty, climate change, mental health, democracy, universal basic income, cure a bunch of diseases, this cancer and that one, and heart disease.
Helping you try to accomplish your goals and be your best.
Very high quality healthcare, important new scientific discoveries. The marginal cost of energy are going to trend rapidly towards zero. It's a more equal world.
It's a group of men that you don't even know who they are. Most people don't even know who they are. And this is a group of men that got together many years ago with one agenda that is called a new world order. Every government in the world has a secret government behind it that run the show. If you think that the president, the prime minister, you think they're doing it, they're puppets. They control armies, nations, governments, all the money in the world, all the richest families in the world, Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and anyone that somehow made money within a very short span of time has to be part of it. And you think that Mike Zuckerberg owns Facebook? He's a puppet. Facebook was created for their manipulation. Same thing with YouTube, same thing with WhatsApp and Instagram and Netflix and everything. World War I was designed by them. World War II, designed by them. Federal Reserve, which people think belongs to the American government. Doesn't belong to the government even. It's a private organization. NASA, CIA, the assassination of JFK, who was the first one who ever talked about it, got a bullet in his head. Needless to say, the attack on the Twin Towers, it wasn't Bin Laden. All one big agenda because they needed to go to Afghanistan. You know why? To put pipes. It's all one big show. We've been fooled and millions of Americans are cheering. We're going to a war against terror. Yeah, you've been fooled. And you think it's different in Israel? You know that Israel was built by the Freemasons, by the way, by the Zionists. There's nothing here kosher. Who approved the Declaration of Israel? The United Nations, of course. An organization of peace and unity, and we love all. It's a terror organization built by the New World Order.
After Babel, power migrated away from thrones and into abstraction, into systems that outlive rulers and outlast borders. That is where wealth enters the story, not as greed, but as architecture, because wealth is power that does not need an army. When Mayor Amschel Rothschild sent his 5 sons into 5 capitals, it was not about conquest, it was about coverage. London, Paris, Vienna, Frankfurt, and Naples. No crown was taken, no flag was raised. But for the first time in history, capital became transnational. It became portable, inheritable, and it became insulated. Insulated from regime change. Empires rise and fall, but debt survives them all. That is the next evolution of Babylon. Power without visibility. Authority without accountability. Influence without responsibility. Because kings need money and wars require credit. So nations borrowed their future. And at this point, dominion begins to transfer quietly. Once wealth becomes a bloodstream of empire, something irreversible happens. Rulers stop ruling. They start managing constraints. A king who cannot fund his army is not sovereign. A nation dependent on credit is not independent. A government that must maintain market confidence does not answer to its people. This is how dominion changes hands without a coup. No one votes on it, but no one resists it because it feels like progress. Babylon learns a new trick. Never seize power directly, just make power dependent.
Britain had become party to 2 further wartime agreements, both of which seemed to contradict the undertaking to Hussein. In 1916, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement between Britain and France allocated what is now Syria and Lebanon to France, and what is now Jordan and Iraq to Britain, whilst proposing to keep Palestine under international control. Then, a year later, Britain made yet another undertaking concerning Palestine.
So it's possibly the most famous letter in modern Jewish history, and it begins with 3 words: Dear Lord Rothschild.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment of Palestine as a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours, Arthur Balfour.
It's time to plan the future. Not their futures, your future.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders.
A new world order. So what will that look like?
Maybe this is the old kind of teacher in me coming out. I think of this a little bit more about a transition of eras rather than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I draw the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is getting replaced wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decades since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I talked about in my remarks, that we are, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like, and at the heart of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order, adapted for the challenges that we face today.
History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected. In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever.
stop. La France a toujours été à la pointe des recherches concernant l'énergie atomique.
Ce cœur artificiel 100% français est un miracle.
La conserve est née.
C'est fait, le train à grande vitesse a été officiellement inauguré aujourd'hui, ce train le plus rapide.
La première projection cinématographique. Cette invention merveilleuse.
Concorde a dit quelle puissance, le voilà, ça y est, formidable.
Au classement de l'alimentation durable, la France est championne du monde. Nouvel avion de combat français, le Rafale.
Premier français commandant de bord de l'ISS.
L'un des meilleurs appareils de chasse du monde.
Notre ambition à tous est d'avoir un jour des hommes sur Mars.
Grâce à la 320, pour la première fois, Airbus dépasse Boeing. Et ça, c'est une véritable révolution.
Sommes-nous seuls dans l'univers?
L'esprit de réforme et d'innovation. Le président de la République française, M. Emmanuel Macron. Depuis votre élection, Monsieur le Président, vous vous êtes fermement établi comme un réformateur audacieux, s'attaquant avec vigueur aux défis complexes de notre époque. En France, le président a initié des réformes majeures visant à revitaliser l'économie, à moderniser le marché du travail et à transformer le système de retraite, prouvant ainsi son engagement indéfectible envers le progrès et la prospérité de son pays. Mais l'influence du président Macron dépasse largement les frontières de la France. Son cœur bat pour l'Europe. Il est un fervent défenseur de l'Union européenne, ouvrant sans relâche pour une Europe plus forte, plus unie et plus résiliente. Sous votre direction, la France s'est affirmée comme un pilier central de l'Union, promouvant l'intégration européenne et luttant pour les valeurs communes de démocratie, de liberté et de solidarité. Sur la scène mondiale, le président Macron est une voix de raison et de stabilité. Dans le monde marqué par des tensions croissantes et un climat politique polarisé, il plaide avec passion pour le multilatéralisme et la coopération internationale. Que ce soit dans la lutte contre le changement de climat, dans la promotion de la paix et de la sécurité, ou dans la défense des droits humains, le monde a besoin de votre leadership. Veuillez accueillir le président de la République française, M. Emmanuel Macron.
Political rookie Emmanuel Macron is leading the polls and tipped to be France's next president.
Et nous allons gagner! Vive la République! Vive la France!
The 39-year-old's meteoric rise has shaken the political establishment while also being its last hope. His centrist, pro-European, open border views stand in stark contrast to the rising voices of Europe's resurgent far right. This is how Macron's unabashed ambition drove him from star pupil to banker to political rebel and now the hot favorite to lead France. Macron was raised in the town of Amiens, 2 hours north of Paris. This is the house he grew up in. The eldest of 3 children from a family of doctors, he attended a Jesuit school. A precocious kid, he preferred the company of teachers to other pupils. After school, he attended university in Paris, studying philosophy, then went to the prestigious National School of Administration, a breeding ground for the French elite. He worked for 4 years as an inspector at the Ministry of Economy before moving to the renowned investment bank Rothschild.
Why is the world divided like this? It is not by accident. All of this is by very meticulously planned action. It is all done by design through the control systems that run our world. All you got to do at all times is follow the money. You'll get to the top and discover the Rothschild banking empire.
With trillions at his disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders.
And their cronies, the banking families, and what is often referred to as the royal political elite. These families that control the world did not suddenly come into power in the last 100 years. We're talking about thousands of years of royal bloodline control of the world.
Macron was quickly parachuted into managing a massive acquisition.
Nestle has agreed to buy Pfizer's infant nutrition business for almost $12 billion.
When the deal went through, he got a big payout. Then in 2012, Macron was offered a position working for the new president and a personal friend, Francois Hollande. 2 years later, Hollande gave him the prestigious position of Minister of Economy. He was 36. But by now, Hollande's public approval rating had fallen to historic lows. Macron threw himself into a plan to loosen economic regulation with testy exchanges in parliament. But the reforms were disliked and the legislation had to be forced through parliament, sparking violent protest. Macron increasingly criticized the government but still enjoyed the president's support. Then, last year, he launched his own political movement, En Marche, or On the Move, thrusting him into the national spotlight.
He's really come out of nowhere. 3 years ago, Emmanuel Macron was barely known to the general public, and here he is today on the verge of becoming president.
That's Mark Dean.
I'm a deputy bureau chief at Bloomberg News in Paris, and I'm on the campaign trail with Emmanuel Macron.
The youthful contender was seen as a presidential long shot.
When he started his movement, everyone, including many journalists, including myself, said, "Oh, well, that's pretty cute, and it's a nice effort, but he's not going to be president."
But borrowing from U.S. President Barack Obama's election playbook, he took to social media and ran a large grassroots campaign. By the time France went to the polls for the first round of voting in April, he had successfully reinvented himself.
Hello to everyone.
He was no longer the failed reformer working under a failed president, but a new voice in politics.
Pourquoi je suis terriblement optimiste aujourd'hui? Parce que je sais, en vous voyant, en observant notre mouvement, que nous réussirons, oui, que nous réussirons à rassembler les Français et à réconcilier les France.
He secured the most votes of any candidate in the first round, putting him into a runoff with another political outsider, the far-right Marine Le Pen. Still, it's not all smooth sailing into the Élysée Palace. Macron has many critics on both sides of the political spectrum.
I believe in the post-COVID world, without reaping the benefits and learning the lessons from what we have experienced. Our societies are vulnerable because nature is reminding us of this. We are vulnerable to a pandemic, climatic events, and so on. And so the economy of tomorrow, strengthened by these lessons. We talk a lot about new strains and variants, but there are some things that are not varying. The economy of tomorrow is going to have to be an economy that thinks about innovation and humanity, and it's going to have to build competitiveness together with the climate challenge, reducing CO2 emissions, adapting our societies, the biodiversity agenda. So it's an economy that will have to be more resilient, that will be better organized, and will have to be including these elements of resistance in the in the supply chains, and we can come back to this later. And also, it will have to be an economy that takes into account this principle of humanity, whether it's on a social or health point of view. We talked about this last year, and I believe that we will not get out of this pandemic or rather, we will get out of this pandemic only with an economy that thinks more about fighting inequalities.
We're in a jungle and we have two big elephants trying to become more and more nervous. If they become very nervous and start war, it will be a big problem for the rest of the jungle. You need cooperation of a lot of other animals. Tigers, monkeys, and so on. A lot of people would like to see there are two orders in this world. This is a huge mistake. We need a single global order.
I think that we're seeing a crisis of the very foundations of today's world. We're losing our benchmarks and our modes of functioning. This is not a historical parenthesis. It's a reflection of our failures in the past.
World order is being shaken like never before. It's being shaken because of errors made by the West in certain crises, but also by choices made by the United States in the past few years, and not just by the current administration. Those choices are having an impact on conflicts in the Middle East and elsewhere, making it necessary to rethink military and diplomatic strategies.
To Germany's parliament, the French president Emmanuel Macron has once again called for their support to create a European army. Macron said the proposal for a joint intervention force would reduce the EU's dependence on the United States.
Europe, and within it, the Franco-French alliance, are invested on this obligation not to let the world slip into chaos, but to accompany it on the way to peace.
Je pense qu'il faut déléguer notre géopolitique aux États-Unis d'Amérique, il faut déléguer notre modèle de croissance à nos clients chinois, il faut déléguer notre innovation technologique aux hyperscalers américains. C'est pas la meilleure idée. Je pense qu'on peut reprendre le contrôle. Au fond, pour moi, c'est simple. Le monde est fait d'herbivores et de carnivores. Si on décide de rester des herbivores, les carnivores gagneront. Et nous serons un marché pour eux. Je pense qu'au moins, ce serait pas mal de choisir d'être des omnivores. Je veux pas être agressif, je veux juste qu'on sache se défendre sur chacun de ces sujets. Mais je n'ai pas envie de laisser l'Europe comme un formidable théâtre habité par des herbivores que des carnivores, selon leur agenda, viendront dévorer.
To that weekend of violence, amid talks of a ceasefire deal.
Moi, je trouve que notre rôle ici, ou au sein de l'Union européenne, c'est pas de commenter l'élection de Donald Trump, savoir si c'est bon ou pas bon. Il a été élu par le peuple américain. Et il va défendre l'intérêt des Américains. Et c'est légitime et c'est une bonne chose. La question, c'est est-ce que nous, on est prêt à défendre l'intérêt des Européens? C'est la seule question qui nous est posée. Et moi, je pense que c'est notre priorité. Et donc, ça ne doit être ni dans un transatlantisme qui serait naïf, ni dans la remise en cause de nos alliances, ni non plus dans un nationalisme étriqué qui ne nous permettrait pas de relever ce défi face à la Chine et aux États-Unis d'Amérique. Et donc, c'est un moment de l'histoire pour nous, Européens, qui est décisif. Au fond, la question qui nous est posée, voulons-nous lire l'histoire écrite par d'autres, les guerres lancées par Vladimir Poutine, les élections américaines, les choix faits par les Chinois en termes technologiques ou commerciaux, ou est-ce qu'on veut écrire l'histoire? Et moi, je pense qu'on a une force pour l'écrire. Nos économies sont fortes, nos pays ont des systèmes de défense sophistiqués, et on représente quelque chose. L'Union européenne, c'est 440 millions d'habitants avec ses 27 pays, et la communauté politique européenne, c'est plus de 700 millions d'habitants. Si on décide d'avoir conscience de ce qu'on représente géopolitiquement, commercialement, c'est une puissance inouïe. Il n'y a aucun marché de 700 millions d'habitants aussi uni par l'histoire, des intérêts, des valeurs que nous autour de cette table. Aucun. Si on se réveille et qu'on décide au fond de ne pas disparaître géopolitiquement et de ne pas être le marché d'ajustement des autres puissances économiquement et commercialement. Et donc pour moi, ce moment, c'est celui où on décide d'agir, de défendre nos intérêts nationaux et européens en même temps, de croire dans notre souveraineté, notre autonomie stratégique, et de dire au fond, on n'a pas envie simplement d'être des clients, d'être un marché qui est pris, de déléguer en fait à d'autres notre économie, nos choix technologiques ou notre sécurité, mais on veut pleinement se saisir de la question de la paix sur notre sol, de notre prospérité et de notre modèle démocratique. Pour moi, c'est ça les trois défis de la communauté politique européenne qu'on a discuté ensemble.
Trying to defend a vision based on values, on a political project which goes beyond the borders of our country, which is supported by the EU and by the United Nations. When we fight for the Paris Accord, we're fighting for an agreement that all the sovereign states have signed.
Let's do everything within our power to preserve the very possibility of a two-state solution. Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security. The time has come. This is why, true to the historic commitment of my country to the Middle East, to peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, this is why I declare that today France recognizes the state of Palestine. This recognition paves the way for useful negotiations, useful for Israelis and Palestinians. This path is a path towards a peace and security plan for all. France and Saudi Arabia submitted this plan to this assembly, and it adopted it by a large majority. It carries our common ambition to break the spiral of violence and to change the situation on the ground. We managed to take a step towards one another, to move away from our habitual stances and to set concrete objectives. We must now set in motion a cycle of peace that meets the needs of all parties.
Last year, we exported 90 terawatt-hour, 90, which means we can localize a lot of data centers on top of what we need in terms of electricity for our own companies, our own households. So it's very important in this world where I have a good friend in the other part of the ocean saying, drill, baby, drill. Here, there is no need to drill. It's just plug, baby, plug. Electricity is available. You can plug, it's ready. And I can tell you, we will go fast and very fast. Here we are committed to go faster and faster and to deliver this energy and these available sites. The fourth point is this ecosystem and how to work better between the large corporates, the different verticals, and AI. And today, Peugeot and Citroën finalized an agreement with Mistral. Today, a lot of our big players finalized agreement with our own solution. I think having more and more cooperation between our large corporates and this innovation is very important. And this is why I do urge the European players to buy European, not because we don't want to buy American or Asian, I want to reassure you. But guess what? When you are in the US and China or India, when you have a very good solution made at home, you prefer this one to the other one. And this is a good reflex. And having this ecosystem is very important. We have the best ecosystem in Europe in France, and we want to leverage on this summit in order to go faster. And this is why a lot of French companies as well announced very, very big investments in order to accelerate this cooperation with public labs, with startups and so on. And it's extremely important.
And Nimrod was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That phrase is not about hunting. It's about dominion. Nimrod was the first man to consolidate power after the flood. The first to look at scattered tribes and see not families, but raw material. Where others rebuilt homes, he rebuilt authority. He gathered men under a single banner. He bound them with protection, food, and purpose. And once they depended on him to live, he no longer needed force to rule. That is how Babylon begins. Not with walls, not with temples, but with centralization. And the Bible says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. Not many kingdoms. One government, because fragmentation breeds resistance. One language, because divided speech breeds thought. One economy, because survival must pass through the gate. And one religion, because authority must appear sacred. Nimrod understood something ancient and dangerous. If you can unify people before God does, you can stand in the place of God. So the tower was raised in rebellion. And this is where history fills in what Scripture compresses. Flavius Josephus writes that Nimrod persuaded man not to ascribe it to God, as if it were through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. Josephus says Nimrod introduced tyranny gradually, not through open violence, but by redirecting trust. He taught the people to fear God less by making themselves feel secure without him. The tower, Josephus says, was built not merely for height, but as an act of defiance, so that if God ever judged the earth again, man would already possess a system strong enough to survive him. The tower was a declaration, and Josephus records the cry of Nimrod's forefathers plainly. They said that if God should ever choose to destroy the world again, they would no longer be at his mercy. Josephus writes that they resolved never again to leave their fate in the hands of God, but to place it in their own strength, their own unity, and their own systems. The tower was not ambition, it was insurance. A vow spoken aloud by a people who remembered the flood and decided obedience was too costly. Their cry was simple. Never again we will trust God for survival. Never again we will submit to judgment. Never again will we be scattered. This was not ignorance, it was defiance. And that is why God did not destroy them with fire. He scattered them. Because a unified humanity armed with fear of judgment and confidence in its own systems will always choose rebellion over repentance. Babylon was not built because man forgot God. Babylon was built because man decided he would never need God again. That is the heart of Babylon. Not atheism, but replacement. Replace God with structure. Replace providence with systems. Replace obedience with participation. And a unified humanity organized under false authority always becomes unstoppable in its rebellion. Babylon falls in Genesis, but the mechanism still survives. Nimrod's genius was not violence, it was design. And every system since that promise of safety, unity, and progress in exchange for obedience is not inventing something new, it's rebuilding Babel.
Distinguished heads of states and governments, President Lagarde, ministers, ambassadors, business leaders, ladies and gentlemen. I'm extremely happy to be here, and it's great to be here, as the Financial Times would say. And it's a time of peace, stability, and predictability. So let's try to address the key challenge of this world in a few minutes' time. But it's clear that we are reaching a time of instability, of imbalances, both from the security and defense point of view and the economic point of view. Look at the situation where we are. I mean, a shift towards autocracy against democracy, more violence, more than 60 wars in 2024, an absolute record, even if I understood a few of them were fixed. And conflict has become normalized, hybrid, expanding into new domains, space, digital, information, cyber, trade, and so on. It's as well a shift towards a world without rules, where international law is trampled underfoot, and where the only law that seems to matter is that of the strongest, and imperial ambitions are resurfacing. Obviously, the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, which will enter into its 4th year next month, and conflicts continue in the Middle East and across Africa. This is as well a shift toward a world without effective collective governance, and where multilateralism is weakened.
The system we're confronting does not announce itself as evil. It announces itself as progress, as safety, as stability, compassion, and enhancement. And if discernment has been replaced with reflex, then people won't test it. They'll just accept it. That's why Babylon doesn't need to force compliance anymore. It just needs people trained not to ask the wrong question. That's the reason most people miss what's happening while it's happening. They're trained to look for spectacle. They're trained to watch for wars and elections and riots and assassinations. Moments loud enough to feel like history. But power doesn't move through spectacle. It moves through process. Through committees, through frameworks, through declarations, through language so dry that most people stop listening halfway through the first sentence. And by the time the effects become visible, the decisions are already made. The debate was over before it even began. So what follows tonight isn't theory. It isn't a prediction, and it isn't a warning based on my feelings. This is a reconstruction of how authority actually moves, of how systems consolidate, and of how a world can be transformed without anyone ever announcing that it's even changing.
We're human beings. We're not symptoms of overpopulation for you to deal with.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed.
3 words. New World Order.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.